I'm a lawyer by qualification. I qualified in the mid-70s, and I had something of a baptism of fire as a very young lawyer. My firm, Bowman Gilfillan, sent me into Soweto following the uprising on the 16th of June, 76, and I spent 2 years defending students and political activists arising out of that, and it had a real lasting impression on me. Primarily, it taught me two things. One was how not to handle conflict, and also how inadequate the law was in dealing with conflict in society. And in that process, I met Cyril Ramaphosa, who got into trouble at the University of the North, and helped him with his difficulties, and that led me to assisting him in getting the National Union of Mine Workers off the ground. And I was the primary NUM lawyer in the 80s, fighting many bitter battles for the union, particularly on the goldfields of the Free State. But a major change came in my life in the late 80s, 87, when I qualified as a mediator. And from then on, my practice changed to one where I was, instead of being called in as a gladiator to fight battles for one side, I was being called in as an independent third-party mediator to resolve conflicts, primarily in the labour area, and because of my close association with NUM, primarily in the mining industry. And I've done a lot of work in the mining industry as a whole, but particularly on the Platinum Belt. And over the years, I've developed a fairly intimate understanding of what goes on there. I've also had a lot of experience in Lonmin and at Maracana itself. I was perhaps blessed not to have been called on to deal with the conflict around August last year, so I think I can stand back and try to give a presentation of what I think happened there. But I am involved now in trying to assist Lonmin and other companies to try to re-establish sound industrial relations. So that's very briefly the background. This presentation normally takes me 90 minutes, and the focus of it is to try to unpack what were the underlying causes, what triggered it, what aggravated it, what, if anything, moderated it, and what lessons there are for conflict resolution specialists out of it. I'm not going to bore you with that. What I want to do is to whip you through the presentation and try to draw out what I think are some learnings for journalists out of the particular Maracana conflict, but more generally understanding conflict in companies. And I think the Maracana incident illustrates some of the most brilliant journalism, but also some of the most mediocre journalism. And I want to just highlight that to you as we go through. I want to start with a great piece of journalism. Unfortunately, I really didn't ever believe that I would ever see anything like that after the times that we spent in the 80s. But to me, a really great piece of journalism, and I think one of the lessons that I want to draw out with you is, to me, the great journalists are the ones that go to the site and get the story firsthand. And that's one of the lessons I want to draw out of this. The photographs that back my presentation are all photographs taken by Greg Marinovich, and I really trust all of you know of Greg Marinovich of Bang Bang Club fame. And again, one of the great things about Greg is that he goes to the site and he literally lives the event. And all of the photographs that are here are his, and they have a journalist's story, which I'll tell you about later, how it is that he very generously has given them to me and allowed me to use them as the background. What I want to do is very, very briefly just take you through the Maracana conflict, and what I want to do is to just try to show you how multifaceted and how complex the contributing factors were to that dispute. And one of the problems when I read the media is often how superficial the analysis and the understanding is of the incident. So I want to whip you through that. It's normally, as I say, what I take 90 minutes on. And to do that, I want to use the standard dispute analysis matrix that those of us in this field use, which is to separate out the manifestations of conflict from the trigger of the conflict, from the causes, which is critically important to get to, from the aggravators, that which made it worse as it went along, the moderators, to the extent that those existed, to give you a more holistic understanding of the conflict. And then I just want to focus on some of the consequences and some of the good reporting and some of the mediocre reporting on the whole Marikana incident and on the conflict in the mining industry as a whole. So without delay, let me go. By the way, that's the famous kopie on which the workers met and where below which the shooting took place. There's the matrix, and as I say, we always try in our analysis to separate out those factors and delve into them in detail, and you'll see that it turns out to be quite a complex picture in the end. The manifestations are always what people focus on, and particularly the media focus on, and quite understandably, and that's where I'm going to start. And one of the key manifestations was very significant disregard of the law. Disregard of collective agreements, disregard of disputes procedures, failure to comply with the Labour Relations Act, unprotected strike action, and there's a lot that I could say about that and the consequences and the problems that that's causing us. Huge levels of hostility, and again, you need to go to Marikana, you need to go into Unkaneng, you need to go to Wonderkorp today to begin to understand the levels of hostility, the anger, the defiance of the authorities, the police, the employers, the desire for revenge. I'm here to bury NUM, rest in peace NUM, enormous hostility between AMCU and NUM, dreadful levels of violence. In the days leading up to the 16th of August, anything that could serve as a weapon was bought at every shop in the Rustenburg area, from Akapi knives to poles of this sort to pangas, axes. 27,000 workers armed themselves in a very short space of time. Very high levels of intimidation, dreadful assaults. And apart from the 34 people that were killed on the 16th of August, there have been a lot of other deaths. This woman, I'm told, was an ANC councillor in the area who took up the cause of some of the widows, and she was subsequently shot by the police, and that's the subject of investigations at the moment. But also just pause for a moment as to think about the greatness of these photographs. Nothing can show you, apart from actually being there, what it's really like in Marikana. The emergence of new players, the emergence of AMCU as a new player, and there's a lot that can be said about AMCU and how new it is and so on, but I don't have time for that. The emergence of worker committees, that's one of the worker committees on the 15th of August. Workers who have rejected all unions and very, very challenging to deal with because you're not quite sure who they represent. They're not formal bodies. They don't have constitutions. Difficult to reach agreements with them, but very often very charismatic, very powerful people on the mine. Also very interesting, the role of the church. They played a major part in eventually mediating the dispute, and there's a lot that could be said about that. Police action, enormous amount is being said about that, and it's obviously important. The aftermath of the 34 deaths, great animosity between many of the workers and the police because, as you know, there were some policemen that were hacked to death, and there are now allegations of police torture of the kind we got used to in the 80s. Very large number of arrests. And the people side of this, which I think Greg captures so brilliantly. This is a photograph of one of the AMCU organizers on the morning after the shooting, reporting back on the loss of comrades on that day. A picture of one of the widows of the miners. And often we forget the human impact of these kind of stories, all the wives, the children, the friends, the family, the colleagues, and so on, and what long-lasting impact that has, and why we're not going to get out of the Maracana situation quickly or easily. Then, of course, there's Farlam, which I'm not going to spend any time on. Then just turning from the manifestations to the trigger, and there are huge lessons to be learned from the trigger, especially for industrial relations and for anybody to understand some of the nonsense that is being spoken at the moment about how to get the mining industry back on track. Need to just have a look at what was the trigger. And the trigger, interestingly, was at Implats, a neighboring mine, and it all goes back to the 2010 two-year wage deal. In essence, what happened there is that NUM spent the whole of the negotiation arguing to keep the wages of rock drill operators, who are the most important guys on the mine, and miners down. One of the great ironies is that the company was desperately wanting to pay rock drill operators more, pay miners more, because they're in short supply. The miners are the skilled workers. The rock drill operators are supermen on a mine. Very few people are capable of doing the arduous work they did. They are scarce as hens, as teeth, and management wanted to pay them significantly more. NUM head office had an ideology, everybody must get paid the same, and notwithstanding all their endeavors, they couldn't persuade it. They eventually agreed to pay everybody the same. But workers, you can't fool them for long. They went to AMCU, that's where AMCU got its entrance, said our interests have not been looked after by NUM. AMCU knocked on Implats' door, said we now represent the miners and the rock drill operators. Implats got into a big panic because they had entered into one of these dreadful agreements, which is a problem we've got to deal with between themselves and NUM in terms of Section 18 of the Labour Relations Act, that no new union could set a foot on a mine unless it had 50% signed up, paid up members, which at Implats means something like 27,000 signed up and paid up members before you could have the most basic constitutional right of access to recruit members. So they said, sorry, go away. They then dashed back to NUM and said, now we're in double trouble. Not only are we losing our miners and our rock drill operators, but this upstart union has come on our door. Please let us pay the rock drill operators and the miners more. I mean, you can't believe that this is happening. And then there are two versions of the story. One version is that NUM very principally said, no, it's a principle of the union, one size fits all. The other version of the story is that the full-time shop stewards get regraded from whatever grade they're on to the highest grade, which is miners. They were set to score big time if Impala Plats was allowed to pay the miners more, and they said to Impala Plats, do it, but don't tell anybody that we said you could. Implats then gave a bonus to the miners, and all hell broke loose. The first people to bomb on Implats was the Chamber of Mines, and there's a huge story around the role of the Chamber of Mines in keeping wages down in the mining industry going back to 1800. They said, you've broken the agreement by agreeing to pay these people more. Now they're going to come on all the mines and ask to be paid more. You're a bad employee, you shouldn't have done it. NUM jumped on their back, everybody jumped on their back. And then the rock drill operators at Implat said, we want what you've given the miners. All the workers at Implat said, we want what you've given the miners. They went out on strike. I'm being as quick as I can. AMCU then knocked on the doors of the miners at Maracana, Lonman, and said, we got the miners at Implats this big deal, join us. They joined. They then made the same demand at Maracana, and eventually the strike started at Maracana. Now, they're very, very rich collective bargaining and industrial relations lessons there, which I don't have time to go into, but understanding the trigger, critically important. Even more important is to try to understand the causes. And the first one I want to mention, because so often in the press, you just get time and time again that it was the poverty wage paid by Lonman that was the sole and only cause of the problem. But let's just unpack that. The average rock drill operator will earn at least 10,000 Rand a month, many of them as much as 15,000 Rand a month with bonuses. Their basic pay is something like 7,900 Rand. We must remember that the average South African worker, from the poorest paid to the chief executive, earns 3,000 Rand. So the slightest inquiry already makes you see that there is a big difference between what a rock drill operator is earning and what the average South African worker is earning. We are told that 59% of the average South African workers have pension, 40% medical aid, 77% UIF. Few workers have all three. Rock drill operators have all three. So they have a 10,000 Rand wage plus those benefits. These are the stats from the Department of, from Stats South Africa. There you see the average South African worker at 3,033, the top 25% of workers starting at 7,890, top 10% of workers at 15,000. That will tell you at the most superficial glance that rock drill operators are at least in the top 25%, maybe in the top 20% of all earners in the country. 4 out of 10 people are unemployed, 7.3 million out of 32 working, and the stats will tell us that actually rock drill operators are probably in the top 6% of earners in the country. Entry-level teachers in South Africa earn very often less than rock drill operators, and we see international comparisons. And it begs the question, was poverty wage the driving issue here? But you don't see that unpacked. Once somebody has said it was the poverty wage, it gets repeated time and time and time again in the media without really being analyzed. I want to suggest to you that here lies perhaps one of the real underlying causes. And you need to literally get in your car and drive. Even today, I went back into Unkaneng last week to see if there'd been any improvement in the last 10 months. And you really need to go there to begin to understand the conditions in which hard-working rock drill operators who work 8 to 10 hours in the most arduous circumstances are living. And these Greg's photographs are just brilliant on this, and this to me is great journalism. It's getting right there and getting kind of under the skin of the issue. These are the houses in which rock drill operators live. No formal housing, no RDP housing, tin shacks, no refuse removal. Dreadful stories I can tell you about that. No electricity. These guys come back after a shift underground, use paraffin lights, no warm water to wash their clothes, to wash themselves, to cook or anything. No security, no formal police, no sewage. I smile when I read all the controversy about bucket toilets in the Western Cape. This is the Unkaneng communal toilet where eventually the second killing took place of the 9 people. Use the koppie as the communal toilet. There are not bucket toilets. There are some people that have battled their way through the clay there to try to make pit latrines, but mostly not. People use the corpies as the spot. No education, you just see kids wandering around the place, no formal schooling. This is the health situation in which the workers live. Transport, having to rely on, I heard a story last week of a worker earning about 5,000 Rand a month who's spending 800 Rand of that to get his kid to school because there are no schools in this area to get a kid to a suburb into a school. No running water. This is and these are these magnificent rock drill operators. I don't show that for any other reason than to try to show you what magnificent men these guys are. This guy spent 8 to 10 hours underground. He's washing himself in a bucket of lukewarm water which has been heated for him by kids. These are the roads of Nkaneng. And I think that you need to ask yourself, doesn't matter whether you pay those rock drill operators 100% more. If people are living in those kind of conditions, you are asking for serious trouble. The working conditions, again, I don't have time to go into it. There are health and safety issues, migrant labor issues, wage differentials, labor brokers, unemployment, terrible stories about money lenders, garnishee orders, recovery attorneys, discrimination, but most importantly of all, the human factor of a belief that nobody gives a damn. NUM doesn't care, the employer doesn't care, the government doesn't care, and dignified men working in these conditions, you do that to them and you're asking for serious trouble. Bargaining structures, a complete mess, also being very poorly understood and poorly reported. Our organizational rights regime in South Africa is seriously subversive of industrial democracy, and I gave you the example at Implats. Over-centralized, while the media and everybody is talking about the solution. That was the solution that was put on the table by the Chamber of Mines. None of this would have happened if there had been a bargaining council in the platinum industry. Just shows a complete lack of understanding, lack of tiers, unresponsive. Bargaining skills, absolutely appalling. The standard of negotiation skills on both the part of management and labor, highly adversarial, not interest-based, poor preparation, ill-informed. This is what I walk into day after day to try to pick up the pieces of this kind of inadequate bargaining, and we try to replace it with that. NUM, of its own admission, became complacent because of the organizational rights regime, which protected it from competition from any other unions. It became highly remote, very ideological. It would get these instructions from head office, which didn't really make any sense to the people on the ground, highly bureaucratic. Again, I could unpack all of that. I smiled when some of the media said it was all Mr. Malema, that he was somehow behind all of this. Just have to spend a bit of time there to know that he did a little guest appearance for one day, and that's about what it is. What is more relevant is that this falls within the Rustenburg municipality that is rated as one of the most corrupt municipalities, and one has to ask oneself, why were there no municipal services of any sort whatsoever applied in that area? A great photograph I've left out, which is the visit by all the politicians to Nkaneng, and you have this incredible contrast of these huge, luxurious gold 4x4s, all parked in front of workers who've been through this kind of situation, living in that kind of situation. Lack of tripartite dialogue, a whole range of aggravating factors that I don't have time to go into that made things worse as it went along. I'm afraid one of them being the media, which I'll unpack for you in greater detail. Very few moderators. The church played something of a role, and ultimately what happens in most conflict is workers get starved back to work, and we think the problem is solved until it raises its head a year or two later. Workers basically, no matter how courageous they are, can't actually sustain a strike for more than, the average strike is 6 to 10 days, and a really long strike is 6 weeks, and then everybody's back to work for the time being. So if you look at it, it is a multifaceted and a complex set of contributing factors. And one of the concerns I have is the superficiality of the reporting, that so often people pick on one aspect. They'll pick on a poverty wage, or they'll pick on politicians, or they sometimes, just lately, people are starting to pick on the social wage as an issue. But it's amazing how so much media coverage is given to the toilet situation in Cape Town, and no media coverage whatsoever is given to the toilet situation in Nkaneng. Even now, 10 months after the event, there hasn't been anything installed there. Let's just look at some of the consequences. Firstly, 45 deaths and growing. We know that there were 34 killed on the day. There were subsequently tit-for-tat deaths, and they continue to grow. For every death, there have been hundreds of injuries. But this is the one that I really want to focus on, just to show you, in contrast to Greg's great work, what mediocre journalism can do to actually stoke conflict in the South African situation. And this, Lonmin workers got a 22% increase as a result of the strike, is repeated time and time again in so-called reputable newspapers, as reputable as The Economist, the Financial Times, and in fact the origin of these photographs surrounds that, because the Daily Maverick, a journalist on the Daily Maverick, wrote about the heroic 22% increase that had been won by the Lonmin workers. And I tweeted back something about what abject nonsense that was. And Greg Marinovich, who I hadn't yet met but I knew, tweeted back saying, why do you say nonsense? I have proof. And I went back and I said, I have examined the proof, and let's have a cup of coffee. And the rest is history. We then met, and we've become very friendly around the Maracana situation. The truth of the matter is, and this is a warning that I want to give to you, is the reason why this has been propagated is that so many journalists sit in Joburg and they just print out union and management propaganda without investigating it. The minute I saw 22%, I knew that it's just not possible. The average settlement throughout the whole of 2012 was 8%. There's just no way on God's earth that any company is going to give a 22% increase 6 weeks into a strike when the strike is already breaking down. So I just put one phone call through to Lonmin and I got the truth. And the truth is that what actually happened is that the maximum increase at Lonmin was 7.7% to the lowest grade. What they did is they conflated the lowest grade with the grade above it. So the workers at the bottom got a 7.7% in year one and 10% in year two, and that happened to kick in on the 1st of October. So conveniently, it was very nice for the unions to be able to say, we've won you 17.7%, when in fact they'd only won 7%, and for employers to say, guys, go back to work, you're getting a big increase, 17.7%. But where the 22% comes from is that it's the apparent, and this is where Greg and I had our little twists, which we have now settled, is that the maximum actual increase to rock drill operators was in fact 3%, and that was only to a few of them, because again they conflated grades, and those rock drillers that were below a certain level were lifted. So some rock drill operators got 3%. How did they get it up to the 22%? They added in the 10% from 2011. they took into account a 750 Rand drill allowance that had been agreed to prior to the strike starting, because Lonmin was in the same situation as Implats, and in order to try to stop the strike, they wanted to do exactly what Implats had did and give the 750. So the 750 is 9% of the wage. Then there's the 3%, that adds up to 22%, and the unions put out the propaganda that they had won a 22% increase. Management didn't say a word because it suited them. As long as the workers went back and believed they were getting 22%, that would be happy. But it was bought hook, line and sinker by the journal. Only one journalist on Fin24 seems to have taken the trouble to do what I did and phone Lonmin and say 22%, and he gives exactly this at the time. But notwithstanding that, every other publication continues to this day to say that. And it had, let me just add to this. In fact, Lonmin workers lost 12% of their annual wages in the strike due to no work, no pay. 9,000 of the contract workers got absolutely nothing because they were employed through labour brokers, so they were out on strike for 6 weeks. They went back, they got nothing. That's nearly a third of the group. Every single solitary worker at Lonmin lost more in wages than they gained, because if you take the loss of 12%, no work, no pay, and you add the maximum of 7,7 or 3, you still come out with a net loss. But that's not the story that has been told. For whatever reason, it is continually painted as a great victory for workers. It's actually a devastating loss for workers who can't afford to lose. But then what makes it even worse is that because the media keep publishing the fact that there's been this heroic victory for workers of 22%, the workers in the gold sector say we also want 22%. They all go out on strike. Then the workers in the coal sector say we also want 22%. They all go out on strike. And it brings the whole gold mining industry, the whole coal mine industry to a stand still. Those workers got nothing other than lost wages. They eventually went back to work with no increase whatsoever. Huge loss to workers. So I've made the point about what a loss this is to workers. Let's look at what it cost the gold and platinum industry. 10.1 billion direct losses to gold and platinum. Coal losses 180 million. Gold output fell 12% to 167 tons, the lowest gold output since 1905 in this country. Gold industry, 29 million Rand per day of strike action. 15.3 billion lost across all mining sectors. There was a 12.5 billion Rand reduction in export revenues, which is coming back to bite us now in tax revenues. GDP forecast down from 3 to 2.5. And those are the consequences, and I think what that should show you is the contrast between great journalism, that is the journalists that firstly went to the scene and took the videos, took the photographs, interviewed the workers, those journalists that took the trouble not to just publish management and union propaganda, but just put up the phone to Lonmin and say 22% and actually find out what the truth is, because you can see what happens when that contagion catches on, when people start basing their analysis on a wrong set of facts. It also means that it's very difficult to solve this problem if people don't understand the problem. Let me stop there.